Hi, Rep. Katie Porter. It's great to have you here. I'm Carlos with Pay Our Interns, and it's our 4-year anniversary. And we're really excited about the work that we do about internships, not just in Congress, but we're expanding across the country because we believe that, regardless of your socioeconomic status, you should be able to get some work experience. So I want to start off with your own experience. I knew you were a Hill intern, so I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I was a Hill intern in college, and very few people paid their interns then. I really couldn't afford to have the experience without getting pay. So I actually chose who to apply to based on who was able to pay me. And I'm grateful to this day that was a possibility. It really opened my eyes to what working in Congress was like, and it made it a little bit easier when down the road I made the jump to run.
I actually did not know that you were paid. I'm glad to hear that. Because I know by 2013-14 is like 90% of the House was not paying.
So I had a Senate internship, and this was back in 1994. Okay. And we had two senators, obviously, and they came up with their own system to alternate. So one semester, one of them would pay, the other one would be unpaid. So rather than getting to choose the senator that I had the most ideological affinity for, I had to do what so many people have to do, which is make a choice that would let me make ends meet.
Thank you for sharing that experience. So one thing I think folks don't always understand about internships is sometimes they're seen like being part of a book club. Like, it's nice if you have it, but it's not essential. There was a report that came out from Time Magazine that in 1992, only 17% of people in college had done an internship. In 2017, it jumped up to almost nearly 70%. So it's basically become a requirement to intern. Yet we know in a lot of sectors, most of the internships are unpaid. And not only that, like the Department of Labor doesn't track how many interns we have. Like there's so many things that like you would think the government would do more about this, given how like 2 million young people intern each year. Why do you think that's the case?
I think that as job markets have gotten more competitive, it's become easier to apply to a lot of jobs. So it's easier to search and find jobs using the internet. That's a good thing, but it's also meant that HR folks are getting more and more applicants. Yeah. So an internship in the field is a really easy, fast thing to screen on. But what gets lost a lot of the time is opportunity to have an internship is directly tied to your family's wealth, your ability to access aid from your school or elsewhere to help make ends meet. So we need to make sure if internships are going to be a barrier to entry, we need to make sure that people have equal opportunity to get those internships.
And I just want to kind of add to that. One thing that we kind of see is that the job market is not like isolated in different parts. Like internships are not isolated from entry-level jobs. And one thing that we've been seeing is this rise, and you see this go viral on Twitter, where the job posting wants a minimum of like a master's degree, but only wants to pay $14 an hour. We're seeing that be more prevalent now than, let's say, a decade or 2 decades ago. Like why is that becoming the case? Where employers want you to have more education, more, qualifications and skills, but they're willing to pay less than what they paid, let's say, in 2005.
Well, fundamentally, worker pay is about having a healthy capitalist system. If you have a capitalist economy that's functioning well, as we are growing the economy, as productivity is growing up, as corporate profit is going up, so would wages. But that's not, in fact, what we've seen. We've had no change in the federal minimum wage for over a decade now, and we're seeing lower wages in a lot of other positions. So I think this is, as I think about how do we make a better capitalist system, making sure that people can come together and fight for fair wages, including paid internships as part of that. It's really about addressing that imbalance, that malfunction of capitalism that doesn't result in higher pay for workers.
Got it. This pandemic has obviously been devastating for so many people, right, across all age groups. But one group that I've seen that's been particularly hit the hardest are a lot of young adults. And what I mean by that is, from March, we saw that actually a study showed that up to 1/3 of all internships were canceled, seasonal jobs, summer jobs, most of them were canceled. And Congress left them out of the stimulus check. So it's kind of like a double whammy, because basically I think it's like if you were dependent over 16, you did not receive a check. I was talking to a Hill staffer, and they pretty much point blank said, in the pecking order, young people are just not a priority for a lot of us. Why do you think that's the case? And how can we change that?
Well, there were definitely a lot of groups that were wanting help with the
Yeah.
coronavirus. This affected everybody. And it was a little bit different than some of the other crises that we've seen, which are really regional because they're natural disaster or maybe limited to one particular sector like tourism after 9/11. But I do think that there's this tendency to feel like young people won't use their political power. And that's not true. This generation has amazing energy and an amazing voice, and making sure that you're turning out to vote, that your vote is counted, and that you're reaching out to your representatives at the federal, state, county, local level, letting them know what your priorities are. That's how you build that political capital. But you're absolutely right that students who graduate during a recession, there are long-term financial harms to that. And that's certainly going to be true to those who are wrapping up their education in the middle of COVID-19.
100%. I was reading an article about Vox that if Congress doesn't act, we're going to see a replay of 2008, where, you know, folks that graduated then face economic scarring that has impacted our economy and our society well into now. And that the same could happen if, you know, Congress or the administration doesn't take action within the next couple of months. And that for me is like extremely concerning. And, you know, that's why I actually pay our interns, like send a letter to Congress, try to push for, if there was going to be a Corona deal, to include like more aid for like unemployed youth. And I think that's something that I don't always see like the media cover. Another thing just kind of, you know, to bring up is every, I would say like other month, there is a quote from an administration official or member of Congress, and they basically say something that's just not realistic, where, you know, one official now said, oh, under Joe Biden's plan of taxing people that make more than $400,000, 80% of Americans would get taxed. And, you know, like, I'm not an economist, but I'm pretty sure most of us don't make more than $400,000. And for me, it's not just like they're playing this. Sometimes I really think it's like ignorance, because a lot of them, you know, come from money. They don't know what it is to have a minimum wage job, to have a working place job. But unfortunately, their ignorance impacts us because they're the ones making the policies. How do you think we can change that? You know, we're having to have more working class people in these positions.
Well, I think one thing that you point out is to make sure that we're electing people from a wide variety of backgrounds, including people who have had those experiences of struggling to figure out if they can afford to take an internship. People who graduated saddled with 6 figures of student loan debt like I did, because we really get what those life experiences are. So I think it's partly about electing people from all different class backgrounds, and also about having a diverse multi-generational leadership structure, making sure that we have people who've experienced the economy of today or yesterday, not the economy of 3 or 4 decades ago, in the decision-making seat.
That little point, I have to say, I remember speaking to a group and a senator came up to me, a state senator, and they said, oh, well, you know, I interned for free and I made it all right. And I said, well, when did you do that? He said, 1972. And I had to stop myself from rolling my eyes, and I kind of had to explain. I was like, well, you know, back then gasoline was like, what, like 10 cents a gallon? You could work your way through college, and these just aren't the realities of now. I do know that, you know, you have a bill, Help America Run Act. It passed the House. It's now in the Senate, and this is revolutionary. It would help like working class moms be able to use campaign funds for childcare expenses, for healthcare premiums. Did you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the Help America Run Act passed the House on a bipartisan basis, which is really terrific. And what it would do is allow campaigns to use campaign donations, if they wanted to cover the cost of the candidate's health insurance, and to cover the cost of a candidate's either senior care for their aging parents or child care. And when you think about the kinds of things that candidates use campaign funds for, everything from private jet trips to fancy wine receptions, we ought to be able to use it to make sure that our candidates can take care of their kids and their elders and have health care during the campaign. There are a lot of people who are discouraged from running because they simply can't figure out how to make ends meet during the campaign. And the result then is that we keep reproducing the same system of power that has led to these voices not being listened to and acknowledged in the first place.
I just, every time you answer, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Like, I totally agree with you. And, at least for pair interns, our focus is that entry level because we see that internships are that economic pivot point towards a more secure future. And it's also on the flip side, how some elites use it as a tool to keep themselves in power because that's like the pathway. And I don't think that's something that's always talked about. My last question is, and it's about college. My sister, she's a senior in high school. She's getting ready to apply to college. And my whole family's scared, right? Like, they're working class, like, and tuition now is more than it's ever been. I think there was 1,000% increase since like 1975. I know that you co-founded the College Affordability Caucus. Why do you think that's so important for you?
Well, we talk a lot about student loan debt, and we should. It's a very real problem. But what we don't talk a lot about is the root cause of student loan debt, which is the cost of college. And so as someone who was a university professor at a lot of different universities before I ran for Congress, we need to figure out how can we bring down the sticker price of college so that it's in reach for more and more families, rather than simply backfilling with student aid and student debt. So, I've often heard my own parents talk about when they went to college, they worked in the summer at minimum wage jobs, doing things like flipping burgers and lifeguarding, and they earned enough to pay their college tuition. That is unthinkable today. So I think in addition to thinking about student loan debt, thinking about what we do about that past, we have to also be having a conversation about how do we bring down the cost of college in the future so we don't find ourselves saddled with generation of debt for the next generation who graduates.
Because that's also not only happening in private schools, but even public schools now, where my older sister went to Santa Barbara. When she started, her tuition was like $9,000, and now it's about to hit $15,000. And that's like for public school, right? Because you're always told if you can't afford private school, just do public school. That's all.
No, but even at public schools, one of the things we see is people say, well, the state's not stepping up. The state's actually paying across the country on average about the same proportion of the tuition. About the same number of dollars in inflation adjusted, but the baseline cost of tuition has gone up so much. So until we bring that tuition down, we're going to continue to see states not be able to absorb that budget increase and passing it along to students in the form of fees, new fees, participation fees, activity fees. And that's sort of become one of the places, along with the cost of room and board, where students are really getting hit. It's not just tuition.
That's where it gets you. Yeah. And that's kind of where federal government kind of comes in, where they could shoulder that, large cost of that in terms of helping with tuition, correct? So I know there's a Senator Warren.
There's a role for the federal government to help cover those costs, but also to be asking, how can we bring down the cost of college? We want to make sure that, ideally our public universities would be affordable to the public. And that means that if you take a median wage worker, they ought to be able to afford to pay tuition. And that's not true in a lot of states right now.
Well, Rep. Kitty Porter, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being in this fight.